Some secrets are too dangerous to keep, and too deadly to reveal. The ancient stones of Dracul Manor held their breath as Dr. Elena Vasquez stepped from her rental car into the Romanian winter night, her medical bag clutched against her chest like armor. She'd traveled halfway around the world to escape the whispers about her illegal blood experiments, trading her Chicago laboratory for this mysterious research position in the Carpathian Mountains. The Gothic estate loomed before her, its windows glowing like amber eyes through the swirling snow. What Elena didn't know was that Lord Adrian Dracul had been watching her for months, studying her published papers on synthetic hemoglobin with desperate hope. For 3 centuries he'd survived by feeding only on the blood of criminals and the dying, his one unbreakable rule that separated him from the monsters of legend. But tomorrow, Vatican investigators would arrive, searching for evidence of the supernatural, and he needed a wife to maintain his mortal facade. The moment she agreed to his strange proposal, the moment her pulse quickened with nervous energy, Adrian's careful control began to fracture. Her scent carried something impossible, something that called to the predator he'd spent lifetimes suppressing. Could a woman running from her past trust a man fleeing from his nature? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Elena's breath formed crystalline clouds in the frigid air as she approached the manor's towering oak doors. Each step crunched through snow that seemed to whisper warnings she couldn't quite decipher. The ornate iron knocker, shaped like a raven with outstretched wings, felt ice-cold even through her leather gloves. Before she could lift it, the door swung open with surprising silence. Dr. Vasquez. The voice belonged to a man who could have stepped from a Renaissance painting, tall, pale, with dark hair that caught the amber light spilling from within. His eyes, an unusual shade of silver blue, seemed to catalogue every detail of her appearance with unsettling intensity. I trust your journey wasn't too arduous. Lord Dracul, I presume. Elena forced her voice to remain steady, though something primal in her hindbrain screamed danger. She'd always prided herself on reading people, a skill honed through years of dealing with grieving families and desperate patients. But this man was unreadable. The roads were challenging. Please, come inside before the storm worsens. He stepped back, and she noticed he moved with an odd predatory grace. Maria will see to your luggage. An elderly woman appeared as if from shadows, her weathered face kind but her dark eyes sharp with curiosity. She murmured something in rapid Romanian to Lord Dracul, who responded in the same language with what sounded like gentle dismissal. The interior of Dracul Manor defied Elena's expectations. Where she'd anticipated dusty antiquity, she found a seamless blend of historical grandeur and modern sophistication. Persian rugs covered polished stone floors, and discreet LED lighting illuminated priceless artwork. The warmth was immediate and enveloping, making her realize how bone-deep cold she'd become during the drive from Bucharest. Your research facility exceeds the specifications you outlined, she said, noting state-of-the-art equipment visible through an open doorway. The centrifuge alone must have cost. Money is rarely an obstacle when pursuing breakthrough research. His smile revealed perfectly even teeth. Though I suspect you're more interested in the work itself than the budget. Elena nodded, though guilt twisted in her stomach. She was here for the work, yes, but also for the generous salary that would fund her daughter Sophia's experimental treatments. Treatments that grew more expensive as traditional medicine continued to fail. Your published work on synthetic blood substitutes is remarkable, Lord Dracul continued, leading her through corridors lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors. Though I confess curiosity about your departure from Chicago Memorial Hospital. The question hit like a physical blow. Elena's grip tightened on her medical bag, feeling the weight of the blood samples hidden inside. Samples that could save Sophia's life if she could just perfect the formula. Sometimes medical ethics committees lack vision for revolutionary treatments. Indeed. Something in his tone suggested he understood more than she'd intended to reveal. I find that those who push boundaries are often misunderstood by their contemporaries. They paused before a massive fireplace, where flames danced over logs that seemed too perfect, too uniform. Elena realized they were ceramic, beautiful but offering no real warmth. Like everything else about this place, appearance and reality seemed strangely divorced. "I should mention," Lord Drackle said, his voice carrying an odd tension, "that we may have visitors tomorrow. Representatives from certain religious organizations who take interest in historical properties like mine. Historians, of a sort." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "They can be quite invasive in their investigations. It would be beneficial if they perceived this estate as thoroughly domestic, thoroughly normal." Elena studied his profile, noting the sharp angles of his cheekbones and the way shadows seemed to deepen around him despite the abundant lighting. "What exactly are you asking?" He turned to face her fully, and for a moment, his composure slipped. She caught a glimpse of something desperate, almost haunted, in his silver-blue eyes. "I need them to believe I'm a married man living a conventional life. Nothing more than an eccentric nobleman with interests in medical research. You want me to pretend to be your wife. The arrangement would be purely professional. You would have complete autonomy over your research, unlimited funding, and access to blood samples from some of Europe's rarest genetic lineages." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "In return, you would play the role of Lady Drackle for perhaps a day or two." Elena's mind raced. The opportunity was unprecedented. Access to genetic variants that could unlock the secrets of blood compatibility, possibly leading to the breakthrough Sophia needed. And if these religious investigators were as intrusive as he suggested, having her own secret identity protected would be invaluable. "I need to review the research parameters first," she said finally. Relief flickered across his features so quickly she almost missed it. "Of course. Maria will show you to your quarters. We can discuss details over dinner." As if summoned, the elderly housekeeper appeared again, beckoning Elena toward a sweeping staircase. But as she turned to follow, a strange dizziness washed over her, probably exhaustion from 36 hours of travel. Behind her, she heard Lord Drackle's sharp intake of breath, followed by what sounded like a whispered curse in a language far older than Romanian. Elena steadied herself against the banister as the dizziness passed, attributing it to exhaustion and the dramatic change in altitude. Maria's gentle hand touched her elbow, guiding her up the stone steps worn smooth by centuries of use. "Your room, Doctor," Maria said in heavily accented English, opening heavy wooden doors to reveal a chamber that took Elena's breath away. Ancient tapestries depicting hunting scenes covered stone walls, while a four-poster bed draped in midnight blue velvet dominated the space. Modern amenities, a laptop charging station, high-speed internet router, and what appeared to be a secure satellite phone, sat discreetly among antique furnishings. But it was the view that truly struck her. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the Romanian wilderness stretching endlessly into gathering darkness, snow-laden peaks disappearing into low-hanging clouds. The isolation was complete, absolute. For the first time since leaving Chicago, Elena felt truly safe from prying eyes and probing questions. "Dinner at 8, Maria announced, placing Elena's luggage near an ornate wardrobe. "Lord Drackle, he keeps unusual hours, breakfast very late, sometimes not until noon." Alone, Elena immediately reached for her phone, her fingers trembling slightly as she dialed the familiar number. The satellite connection crackled, but Sophia's voice came through clearly, weak but unmistakably her daughter. "Mom, how's the creepy castle?" Despite everything, Elena smiled. Even battling a rare blood disorder, Sophia maintained her teenage irreverence. "It's actually quite beautiful, sweetheart. Very atmospheric. Did you meet Count Dracula yet?" Sophia's laugh dissolved into a coughing fit that made Elena's chest tighten with familiar panic. "How are you feeling today? Did Dr. Martinez adjust your transfusion schedule?" "Mom." Sophia's voice carried that patient tone teenagers reserved for overprotective parents. "I'm okay. Aunt Carmen's here and the home nurse is nice. Stop worrying about me and focus on your secret science project. If only she knew how secret, Elena thought, remembering the vials of experimental synthetic blood hidden in her medical bag. The formula was so close to perfect, just a few more adjustments to the protein structure, better compatibility with rare blood types like Sophia's. Traditional medicine had failed. Her daughter's body rejected conventional transfusions with increasing violence. The synthetic blood Elena was developing represented Sophia's only hope for a normal life. I love you, baby. Love you too. Now go do brilliant science things. After ending the call, Elena unpacked methodically, a ritual that provided comfort in unfamiliar surroundings. Her clothes hung strangely in the massive wardrobe, modern fabrics looking out of place among carved cherubs and gilt details. She arranged her research materials on an antique writing desk, notebooks filled with genetic sequences, preliminary test results, and theoretical models for blood synthesis. The hidden compartment in her bag yielded its precious cargo, 12 vials of experimental synthetic blood in various stages of development. Each represented months of work, countless sleepless nights in her private lab, and increasingly desperate attempts to save Sophia before time ran out. The vials glowed faintly in the lamplight, their artificial luminescence a side effect she hadn't yet eliminated. Elena held one up to the window, watching the strange play of light within the crimson liquid. The base formula was sound, synthetic hemoglobin that could carry oxygen efficiently while avoiding immune rejection. But something was still missing, some crucial element that would make it truly compatible with the human body. The blood samples Lord Drackle promised might contain the genetic markers she needed. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Doctor? Lord Drackle awaits in the dining room. Elena quickly secured the vials and checked her appearance in an ornate mirror. The woman looking back seemed older than 34, stress lines etched around dark eyes that had seen too many failures, too many desperate families. The professional facade she'd worn for so long, confident, competent Dr. Vasquez, felt increasingly fragile. The dining room continued the manor's theme of elegant anachronism. Candles flickered in silver candelabras, casting dancing shadows across a table that could seat 20 but was set intimately for 2. Lord Drackle stood as she entered, now dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit that emphasized his pale complexion. I hope the accommodations meet your needs, he said, pulling out her chair with old-world courtesy. More than adequate. Thank you. Elena settled into the high-backed chair, noting that he moved around the table's perimeter rather than simply walking behind her. An odd quirk of personal space, perhaps. The meal appeared without her noticing Maria's approach, perfectly prepared beef that Elena realized she was ravenous for, accompanied by wine that tasted older than countries. Lord Drackle ate sparingly, she noticed, mostly watching her with those unsettling silver-blue eyes. The research parameters, she began, eager to focus on safe, scientific ground. Of course. He withdrew a leather portfolio from seemingly nowhere. As promised, unlimited funding and access to the most comprehensive collection of rare blood samples in Europe. Some lineages trace back 15 centuries. Elena's breath caught. Genetic lines that old might contain evolutionary adaptations lost to modern populations, exactly what she needed to perfect her synthetic formula. The Vatican investigators you mentioned, what exactly concerns them? Lord Drackle's wineglass paused halfway to his lips. They investigate anomalies, unexplained phenomena. Sometimes their curiosity becomes rather intrusive. Something in his tone made Elena's researcher instincts prickle with interest and caution in equal measure. Anomalies, Elena repeated, setting down her fork. The word hung between them like a challenge. What sort of anomalies would interest the Vatican in a medical research facility? Before Lord Drackle could answer, the lights flickered. Once, twice, then died completely, plunging the dining room into candlelit amber shadows. The sudden darkness seemed to transform him. His pale skin took on an almost luminous quality, and his eyes reflected the flame like a nocturnal predator's. The generator, he said, though his voice carried no surprise. Maria will... A sharp crack echoed through the manor, followed by the distinctive groan of wood under immense pressure. Elena startled, her wineglass nearly toppling. "What was that?" Lord Dracul was already standing, his movement so fluid it seemed to defy physics. "The storm has intensified beyond our forecasts. That was likely a tree falling across the access road." He moved to the window, pulling back heavy curtains to reveal a wall of swirling white. The blizzard had transformed from gentle snowfall to a raging tempest that obscured everything beyond the glass. Elena joined him, her breath fogging the cold panes. The world outside had vanished, no distant mountains, no forest, nothing but an impenetrable vortex of snow and wind. How long do storms like this typically last? This is no typical storm. His reflection in the glass showed an expression she couldn't quite read, concern mixed with something that might have been anticipation. The local weather service issued no warnings. It appeared almost unnaturally fast. As if summoned by their conversation, Maria burst through the dining room doors, her usual composure shattered. She spoke rapidly in Romanian, gesturing toward the entrance. Lord Dracul's jaw tightened with each word. "What is it?" Elena demanded. "The Vatican investigators. They arrived early, ahead of the storm. Their vehicle is trapped in the courtyard." His silver-blue eyes met hers with newfound urgency. "They're requesting shelter until the weather passes." Elena's pulse quickened. "You said they'd come tomorrow. I haven't agreed to anything yet." "Dr. Vasquez." His voice carried a gravity that made the shadows seem to deepen around them. "These men don't simply investigate historical curiosities. They hunt things that shouldn't exist, things that have learned to hide in plain sight." He stepped closer, and she caught a strange scent, something metallic and old, like iron left in rain. "If they discover what I truly am, if they find evidence of my nature, they won't simply leave. They'll ensure I never threaten their perception of the natural order again." "Your nature?" Elena's scientific mind raced through possibilities, each more impossible than the last. "What exactly are you saying?" Heavy footsteps echoed from the entrance hall, accompanied by voices speaking in rapid Italian. Maria appeared again, wringing her hands, clearly awaiting instructions. Lord Dracul moved to Elena's side with that unnatural grace. "I'm saying that some legends are warnings disguised as folklore. Some monsters learn to wear human faces so well that even they sometimes forget what lurks beneath." His hand touched her arm and his skin was cold as marble. "The blood samples I promised you, they're not from ancient lineages, Elena. They're from my lineages, 15 centuries of evolution, adaptation, survival." The implications hit her like a physical blow. Vampires. He was claiming to be, but that was impossible, wasn't it? Medieval superstition, Gothic romance, Hollywood fiction. Except his cold touch, his too pale skin, the way he moved like gravity, affected him differently. "You're insane," she whispered, even as part of her clinical mind began cataloguing evidence that supported his impossible claim. "Am I?" He released her arm, stepping back. "You came here fleeing your own impossible situation, developing synthetic blood to save a daughter whose condition baffles every specialist you've consulted. You've already crossed ethical lines, broken laws, risked everything for a treatment that shouldn't work according to conventional medicine." His eyes seemed to glow in the candlelight. Sometimes the impossible is simply the undiscovered. The voices in the hall grew louder, more insistent. Maria's anxious whispers carried an edge of panic. "They're coming to the dining room," Lord Dracul said quietly. "In 30 seconds, 2 Vatican investigators will enter this room expecting to find a normal nobleman and his wife enjoying a quiet dinner. They'll have instruments that detect supernatural phenomena, training to recognize signs of inhuman activity, and authorization to act decisively on their findings." He extended his hand toward her. "I need you to choose, Elena. Help me maintain this deception, and I'll give you access to blood that could revolutionize your daughter's treatment. Blood that carries genetic adaptations developed over centuries of survival." Footsteps approached the dining room doors. "Or refuse, and we'll both face consequences neither of us is prepared for." Elena stared at his outstretched hand, her world tilting on its axis. Everything she thought she knew about reality, about the possible and impossible, hung in the balance. In the distance, Sophia's fragile laugh echoed in her memory. Her daughter, who was dying while conventional medicine offered nothing but false hope. The dining room doors began to open. Elena's hand froze halfway to his, suspended in the space between sanity and impossibility. The dining room doors creaked wider, revealing shadows of approaching figures, but her mind had fractured into 1,000 racing fragments, each screaming different warnings. Vampire. The word lodged in her throat like a shard of glass. Everything rational inside her recoiled. 15 years of medical training, peer-reviewed journals, scientific method. Vampires belonged in Gothic novels, not research facilities. Not in the desperate calculations of a mother trying to save her dying child. Yet his skin had been cold as winter stone. His movement defied natural physics. And those blood samples, if they truly contained centuries of genetic adaptation, the implications for Sophia's treatment. Elena. His voice was barely audible, but it cut through her paralysis. Please. The footsteps grew closer. She could hear Italian voices, authoritative and sharp. Vatican investigators, he'd said. Men who hunted things that shouldn't exist. A hand trembled in the space between them. If she took it, she'd be crossing more than just a physical threshold. She'd be abandoning everything she thought she knew about the world, about the boundaries between science and superstition, about what monsters looked like. But if she didn't? Sophia's face flashed through her mind. Not the brave teenager who'd laughed about creepy castles, but the pale, exhausted child who'd spent last Christmas in the hospital, her body rejecting another transfusion. The little girl who'd whispered, "Mommy, am I going to die?" With the devastating clarity that only children possessed. What if he's telling the truth? The thought hit like ice water. What if the impossible was simply the undiscovered? She'd already shattered her medical ethics, conducted illegal experiments, fled across an ocean chasing theories that made her colleagues question her sanity. How was this different? Because vampires don't exist, her rational mind shrieked. Because you're a scientist, not some desperate woman chasing fairy tales in foreign castles. But she was desperate. Desperately, completely, willing to risk everything, desperate. Traditional medicine had failed Sophia. Conventional treatments had become increasingly brutal and ineffective. The synthetic blood formula she'd developed was close, so tantalizingly close, but missing some crucial element that would make it truly viable. Blood with centuries of genetic adaptation might contain exactly what she needed. The dining room doors swung fully open. Dr. Vasquez, a crisp voice, called in accented English. "I apologize for the intrusion." Elena's breath caught. She could see them now, 2 men in dark coats, snow melting from their shoulders. One carried what looked like a briefcase, but something about its weight and the careful way he handled it suggested sophisticated equipment inside. The other man's eyes swept the room with the methodical precision of someone trained to notice details others missed. Lord Dracul's extended hand remained steady, but she caught the tightening around his eyes, desperation masked by centuries of practiced composure. "These gentlemen require shelter from the storm," he said with remarkable calm. "Father Benedetti and Professor Torretti from the Vatican Historical Commission." Historical Commission. Elena's scientific training kicked in, analyzing the euphemism. Men with equipment designed to detect supernatural phenomena, investigating a nobleman who claimed to be an undead creature. This wasn't historical research. This was a hunt. "Your wife." The man identified as Father Benedetti stepped forward, his gaze settling on Elena with uncomfortable intensity. Something in his expression suggested he already suspected irregularities. The moment stretched like a wire under tension. Elena felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down on her. Take his hand and enter a world where vampires existed, where centuries-old blood might save her daughter's life, where she'd have to convince trained investigators that she belonged to a monster. refuse and watch whatever fragile hope she'd found in this isolated manor crumble along with any chance of accessing those precious genetic samples. Sophia's laugh, weak but determined. "Mom, stop worrying about me and focus on your secret science project." If she walked away now, she'd return to Chicago empty-handed. Return to watching her daughter slowly die while conventional medicine offered nothing but incrementally less devastating failures. Return to the same illegal experiments in hidden laboratories, the same desperate midnight hours mixing synthetic compounds that never quite worked. But if those blood samples truly contained what he claimed— Elena's fingers brushed against his marble-cold skin, and the contact sent an electric shock up her arm. Not painful, something else entirely. Something that made her breath catch and her pulse stumble. His eyes widened slightly, and she caught a sharp intake of breath that sounded almost hungry. "My wife has been unwell," Lord Dracul said smoothly, his fingers closing around hers with gentle firmness. "The mountain air affects some constitutions differently than expected." The lie rolled off his tongue with practiced ease, but Elena felt the subtle tremor in his grip. Whatever had just passed between them, that strange electric recognition when their skin met, had affected him too. "What am I doing?" the thought screamed through her mind as Father Benedetti's calculating gaze shifted between them, clearly cataloguing details, searching for inconsistencies. "I'm Elena," she heard herself say, her voice steadier than she felt. Elena Dracul. The false name tasted strange on her tongue, like copper, and promises she couldn't take back. Father Benedetti's eyes narrowed slightly, and Elena realized with crystalline clarity that there truly was no retreat now. The words hung in the air between them like a signed contract, binding her to this impossible charade. She'd stepped across a threshold that existed not just in this storm-trapped manor, but in the fundamental nature of reality itself. "A pleasure," Father Benedetti replied, though his tone carried the weight of suspicion. "How long have you been married?" 6 months, Lord Dracul answered without hesitation, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in what might have looked like affection to an observer. Elena felt the gesture like a brand, cold fire that seemed to mark her as something other than what she'd been moments before. "We honeymooned in Prague." The lie came so smoothly that Elena wondered how many times he'd practiced this deception, how many identities he'd worn across the centuries. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it sparked a different kind of fear, the recognition that she was capable of matching his performance, that desperation had transformed her into someone who could stand in candlelit shadows and claim to be the wife of a creature that shouldn't exist. Professor Toretti stepped forward, his equipment case creating soft metallic sounds that seemed out of place in the manor's ancient elegance. "The storm came upon us quite suddenly, most unusual for the region this time of year. Mountain weather can be unpredictable." Elena found herself responding, drawing on half-remembered conversations with Sophia about climate patterns they'd studied together. The topography creates unique pressure systems. She felt Lord Dracul's surprise in the subtle shift of his grip. She was improvising, adding details to their fabricated reality. But more than that, she was discovering something unsettling about herself. She was good at this. The same analytical mind that had made her an exceptional researcher was now cataloguing the investigator's expressions, noting Father Benedetti's interest in the room's architectural details, observing how Professor Toretti's gaze lingered on the candles as if their light revealed more than simple illumination. "Your American Father Benedetti observed, and the comment felt like a test. Chicago." Elena met his stare directly, letting her authentic background anchor the deception. "I was doing research at the University Medical Center before," she gestured vaguely around the manor, "before Adrian convinced me that love was more important than career advancement." The words tasted like betrayal, not of Lord Dracul's trust, but of her own scientific integrity. She'd spent 15 years building a reputation based on precision and truth, and now she was weaponizing that credibility to protect a man who claimed to be a vampire. A man who might hold the key to saving Sophia. That thought steadied her, transforming guilt into something sharper and more focused. She'd already sacrificed her ethics for her daughter's sake. What was one more line crossed in service of the impossible? Medical research, Professor Toretti repeated with studied casualness. What field? Before Elena could respond, Lord Drackle stepped smoothly into the conversation. Hematology, he said, and Elena felt her heart skip. Elena specializes in blood disorders. Quite fitting, given the genetic anomalies that run in my family line. The statement was so loaded with double meaning that Elena had to concentrate on keeping her expression neutral. He was telling them the truth while making it sound like natural conversation. The audacity was breathtaking. How fascinating, Father Benedetti murmured, and something in his tone made Elena's skin prickle with warning. Blood disorders can be quite hereditary. Some lineages carry the most unusual genetic markers. The air in the room seemed to thicken. Charged with undercurrents Elena was only beginning to understand. This wasn't casual conversation. It was intellectual combat disguised as small talk, each side probing for weaknesses while maintaining the pretense of civilized discourse. Maria appeared in the doorway, speaking rapid Romanian that Elena couldn't follow, but understood. Instinctively, rooms prepared, sanctuary offered, the trap closing around all of them. You must be exhausted, Elena said, surprised by how naturally concern colored her voice. The storm looked terrible from the dining room windows. As the investigators were led away to guest quarters, Elena remained frozen beside Lord Drackle, his cold hand still wrapped around hers. The immediate performance was over, but its implications crashed over her like a delayed avalanche. She'd done it. Crossed the threshold, committed herself to a path that led away from everything she'd understood about the world and toward possibilities that defied rational explanation. The man beside her might be a creature from humanity's darkest legends. The blood samples he promised might contain genetic adaptations that violated every law of evolutionary biology she'd ever studied. And yet, for the first time since Sophia's diagnosis, Elena felt the dangerous flutter of genuine hope. She'd entered the unknown. There truly was no going back. The moment the investigators' footsteps faded into the manor's depths, Lord Drackle released Elena's hand as if her touch had burned him. The absence of his cold grip left her fingers strangely bereft, tingling with phantom sensation. That was unexpected, he said quietly, his silver-blue eyes studying her with newfound intensity. You adapted to the deception with remarkable ease. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how thoroughly she'd committed to this impossible charade. I'm a researcher. Improvisation is part of the skill set. The words came out steadier than she felt, though I have to ask, how many times have you done this before? More than I care to count. He moved toward the windows, gazing out at the storm that had trapped them all together, though never with stakes quite this high. Stakes? Elena followed his gaze, watching snow whip against ancient glass. You mean beyond convincing Vatican investigators that you're human? His laugh held no humor. Father Benedetti isn't simply a historian, Elena. He's what the Church calls a specialist in anomalous phenomena. Professor Toretti designs equipment that can detect metabolic irregularities, electromagnetic disturbances, cellular degradation patterns that don't conform to normal human baselines. He turned back to her, and in the candlelight his skin looked even paler, more translucent. They're not here to study medieval architecture. The implications settled over Elena like ice water. They're here to prove you're a vampire. They're here to eliminate me if they find sufficient evidence. His matter-of-fact tone made the statement even more chilling. The Vatican has been quietly managing supernatural threats for centuries. Most never make it to official records. Elena sank into one of the dining chairs, her legs suddenly unsteady. And I just volunteered to be your alibi. You volunteered to save your daughter. Lord Drackle's voice carried an unexpected gentleness. The question now is whether we can maintain this deception long enough for the storm to pass and for me to provide what you need. The blood samples. Elena forced herself to focus on the scientific possibilities rather than the existential terror of her situation. You said they contain genetic adaptations. What kind of adaptations? He was quiet for a long moment, seeming to weigh his words. My condition, vampirism for lack of a better term, isn't supernatural in the way folklore suggests. It's biological, a genetic mutation that occurred centuries ago, one that fundamentally altered how my body processes blood, stores energy, repairs cellular damage. He gestured toward his unnaturally pale skin. I don't age because my cells have learned to regenerate indefinitely. I don't require traditional food because I can extract nutrients directly from blood with perfect efficiency. I'm stronger, faster, more resilient than baseline humans because the mutation optimized every biological system. Elena's scientific mind raced through the implications. That's impossible. The energy requirements alone would violate thermodynamics. Would they? He moved closer, and she caught that strange metallic scent again. Old iron, copper, something that made her pulse quicken. Or have you simply never encountered a biological system that evolved beyond conventional limitations? Your synthetic blood research suggests you understand that traditional medicine has boundaries, Elena. What if those boundaries aren't as fixed as you've been taught? Before she could respond, Maria appeared in the doorway again, this time carrying a tray with what looked like tea service. But as she set it down, Elena noticed the woman's hands were shaking. Maria, Lord Drackle said in gentle Romanian, then switched to English. What is it? The priests, Maria whispered, her accent thick with anxiety. They bring machines, strange machines that hum and click. They ask questions about your habits, your meals, when you sleep. Her dark eyes darted between them. They ask if you have guests often, if your wife seems healthy. Elena felt her stomach drop. Healthy? What does that mean? Lord Drackle's expression had gone carefully blank, but she caught the tension in his shoulders. It means they're not just investigating my nature, they're determining whether I pose an active threat. His gaze met Elena's, and she saw something that might have been regret. Vampires who feed on humans leave specific physiological markers in their victims. Anemia, unusual bruising patterns, behavioral changes. They think I'm your food source. The words came out as a strangled whisper. They think you're evidence. His voice had gone dangerously soft. If they find indicators that I've been feeding on you, it becomes more than suspicion. It becomes proof. Elena's mind reeled through the logical chain. Prove he was a vampire who fed on humans, and the Vatican investigators would have justification for whatever elimination protocols they'd brought with them. Fail to prove it, and they might withdraw, leaving her access to the genetic material that could save Sophia. But now she had to convince trained specialists that she wasn't the victim of supernatural predation while pretending to be married to a creature who claimed to have lived for centuries. How do we? She began, but footsteps in the corridor cut her off. Professor Toretti appeared in the doorway, carrying a small device that emitted a soft, rhythmic clicking sound. Forgive the intrusion, he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I was hoping we might continue our conversation about your research, Dr. Drackle. Blood disorders can be so illuminating. Elena's throat went dry as Professor Toretti stepped fully into the room, his device casting an eerie blue glow that pulsed in rhythm with its mechanical heartbeat. The clicking grew more rapid as he moved closer to where she and Adrian stood, and she realized with crystalline horror that it was reacting to something or someone. That's quite a sophisticated piece of equipment, Adrian said with remarkable composure, though Elena caught the subtle shift in his posture, the way his body seemed to coil like a predator preparing to strike. Archaeological survey tools have certainly advanced since my university days. Oh, this isn't for archaeology. Professor Toretti's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp in the candlelight. It's a metabolic scanner. Fascinating technology. It can detect cellular activity patterns, electromagnetic signatures, even blood chemistry variations from a distance of several meters. The device's clicking accelerated to a staccato rhythm that made Elena's skin crawl. Whatever it was measuring, Adrian's presence was making it very, very excited. Blood chemistry, Elena heard herself say, her scientific curiosity warring with growing dread. That's remarkably advanced for field equipment. The technical specifications must be incredible. Indeed. Toretti's dark eyes fixed on her with predatory interest. For instance, it can identify unusual iron concentrations, abnormal oxygen saturation levels, even the presence of certain, let's call them non-standard cellular structures. The clicking reached a fever pitch. It's particularly sensitive to blood that's been metabolically processed in unexpected ways. Elena felt Adrian go perfectly still beside her, the kind of supernatural stillness that no human could achieve. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she realized they were being tested, not questioned but actively scanned for evidence of vampiric activity. How fascinating, she managed, forcing her voice to remain steady. Though I have to admit, as a hematologist, I'm skeptical about the accuracy of non-invasive blood analysis. Too many variables can affect readings: diet, medication, environmental factors, stress levels. She gestured toward the storm-lashed windows. Even atmospheric pressure changes from severe weather can alter metabolic patterns. For a moment, something like approval flickered in Toretti's expression. An excellent point, Dr. Dracul. Though this particular device has been calibrated to filter out most environmental variables. He adjusted a dial on the machine, and the clicking slowed marginally. It's designed to identify very specific anomalies, patterns that suggest, shall we say, alternative nutritional sources. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Elena's mind raced through everything Adrian had told her about vampiric biology, about the way his body processed blood with perfect efficiency. If the device could actually detect those metabolic signatures. Alternative nutritional sources? She forced a laugh that sounded only slightly strained. Professor, I think you've been reading too many Gothic novels, though I suppose working for the Vatican Historical Commission, you must encounter all sorts of colorful local legends. Legends, Toretti repeated softly, his gaze shifting between them. Yes, this region is rich with folklore. Tales of the undead, creatures who sustain themselves on human blood, ancient bloodlines that carry supernatural traits. The device's clicking began to stabilize into a slower, more measured rhythm. Of course, most such stories have perfectly rational explanations when examined scientifically. Elena felt a flicker of hope. The scanner seemed to be settling, its readings becoming less agitated. Whatever it had initially detected, perhaps her presence, her normal human metabolic signature, was providing enough interference to muddy the results. Rational explanations, Adrian agreed, and Elena marveled at how completely human he sounded. Though I confess, growing up in this castle surrounded by centuries of dramatic family history, one develops an appreciation for the romantic appeal of such legends. My ancestors certainly cultivated an air of mystery. Your ancestors. Toretti's attention sharpened again. The Dracul family line goes back quite far, doesn't it? Medieval records suggest some rather unusual characteristics among various family members. Genetic quirks, Elena interjected smoothly, surprised by her own boldness. That's actually how Adrian and I met, through my research into hereditary blood disorders. The Dracul lineage carries several fascinating mutations: iron absorption abnormalities, unusual red blood cell morphology, enhanced healing factors. She was improvising wildly now, but her scientific background lent credibility to the fabrication. Nothing supernatural, of course, but the kind of genetic variations that might seem remarkable to observers in earlier centuries. Toretti's eyebrows rose with genuine interest. Hereditary blood disorders? How intriguing. And you've been treating your husband's conditions? The question felt like a trap, loaded with implications Elena was only beginning to understand. If they believed she'd been treating Adrian's vampiric nature, if they thought her medical expertise was being used to help him maintain his inhuman condition. Managing, she corrected carefully. Genetic disorders can't be cured, only managed through careful monitoring and nutritional support. She moved closer to Adrian, forcing herself to take his cold hand in hers again. The iron absorption issues require a very specific dietary regimen: high iron foods, careful supplementation, regular blood work to ensure proper levels. The scanner's clicking had now settled into an almost normal rhythm, its blue glow dimmed to a faint pulse. Whatever readings it had initially detected were being masked or explained away by her presence and explanation. But Elena caught something else in Toretti's expression, a calculating intelligence that suggested he wasn't entirely convinced by their performance. The device might have been fooled, but the man operating it remained dangerously skeptical. They'd passed the first test, but Elena realized with growing dread that this was only the beginning. Toretti's smile never wavered as he made a show of checking his device's readings one final time. "Remarkable how modern science can demystify the most dramatic folklore," he said, but his eyes remained sharp, watchful. "Though I must say, Dr. Dracul, your expertise in hereditary blood disorders makes you uniquely qualified to assess whether certain historical claims might have legitimate medical foundations." Elena's pulse quickened. This wasn't casual conversation, it was an interrogation disguised as academic discourse. Historical claims? Medieval accounts of individuals with extraordinary longevity, unusual dietary requirements, enhanced physical capabilities. Toretti's fingers danced over his scanner's controls. If such traits were indeed hereditary, as you suggest, then surely a blood specialist of your caliber would recognize the genetic markers. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Either she possessed knowledge that would implicate Adrian, or she lacked the expertise she claimed. There was no safe middle ground. "Longevity genes do exist," Elena said carefully, her mind racing through legitimate research she could cite. Mutations affecting telomere maintenance, cellular repair mechanisms, oxidative stress resistance. But extraordinary longevity beyond normal human parameters would require combinations of genetic factors that are statistically impossible. We're talking about multiple simultaneous mutations that would have to occur together and be passed down intact through generations. She was walking a tightrope between credibility and impossibility, using her real expertise to make Adrian's condition sound scientifically implausible while secretly acknowledging its potential reality. Statistically impossible, Father Benedetti's voice cut through the conversation like a blade. Elena spun to find him standing in the doorway, his dark robes making him appear to have materialized from shadow itself. And yet statistics often fail to account for divine intervention, or its opposite. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet. Elena felt Adrian's hand tighten almost imperceptibly around hers, the only sign of tension in his otherwise perfect composure. "Father Benedetti," Adrian said with polite warmth that sounded absolutely genuine, "I trust your room is comfortable. These old castles can be drafty." "Quite comfortable, thank you." The priest's gaze moved between them with surgical precision. "Though I confess I find myself curious about your family's historical records. The Vatican archives contain some fascinating correspondence regarding the Dracul lineage. Letters dating back centuries, describing encounters with family members who seemed remarkably consistent in their appearance across multiple generations." Elena's blood turned to ice. Historical documentation of Adrian's immortality would be impossible to explain away with genetics and scientific rationalization. "Family resemblance can be striking," she heard herself say. "Strong genetic traits for bone structure, coloring, build. It's not uncommon for descendants to bear remarkable similarity to ancestors. Add in the tendency for family portraits to emphasize hereditary features, and you get an impression of supernatural consistency where there's actually just robust genetic expression." But even as the words left her mouth, Elena knew they sounded thin. Academic explanation couldn't account for identical individuals appearing in records spanning centuries. "Perhaps," Benedetti said softly, "though the descriptions go beyond mere appearance, accounts of strength, speed, resilience that transcend human norms. Witnesses describing individuals who seemed immune to injury, who moved with inhuman grace, his dark eyes fixed on Adrian, who were never observed eating conventional food. The silence that followed felt like a held breath. Elena could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears, could feel the walls of their carefully constructed deception beginning to crumble under the weight of historical evidence. Adrian stepped forward slightly, positioning himself between Elena and the two investigators. The movement was subtle, protective, but it sent a clear message that chilled her to the bone. He was preparing for their charade to fail, for this encounter to turn violent. Historical accounts from medieval periods are notoriously unreliable, Adrian said, his voice carrying an edge of steel beneath its cultured politeness. Superstition, limited understanding of medical conditions, the tendency to mythologize unusual individuals, they all contribute to exaggerated records. Exaggerated, Toretti mused, raising his scanner again. The device immediately began clicking rapidly, its blue glow intensifying as it focused on Adrian, or perhaps simply honest. Elena watched in growing horror as the machine's readings spiked to levels that made the earlier detection seem mild. Whatever masking effect her presence had provided was being overwhelmed by closer proximity and sustained scanning. Fascinating, Benedetti murmured, pulling out what looked like an ornate silver crucifix. Dr. Dracul, I wonder if you might indulge an old priest's curiosity. Would you mind touching this? It's a family heirloom, blessed silver from the Vatican's own forges. Quite harmless to anyone of conventional constitution. Elena realized with crystalline clarity that they had reached the moment she'd been dreading since the investigators arrived. The careful dance of misdirection was over. Now came the test that would either save them or destroy them both, and with them, any hope of saving her daughter. Everything she'd learned about deception, about Adrian's true nature, about the stakes of their impossible charade, was about to be put to the ultimate trial. And failure meant more than exposure. It meant death. The silver crucifix gleamed in the candlelight like a weapon waiting to strike. Elena stared at the ornate religious artifact, her mind fracturing under the weight of what she was witnessing. The scanner's frantic clicking filled the room like the sound of death rattles, and she knew with sick certainty that their carefully constructed facade was about to shatter completely. Adrian regarded the crucifix with the same polite interest he might show a mildly curious academic paper. Of course, Father, though I'm afraid my knowledge of Vatican metallurgy is quite limited. Elena wanted to scream, to throw herself between Adrian and the blessed silver, to find some way to stop what was about to happen. But she was frozen, trapped in the horrifying realization that she was about to watch the man who represented her daughter's only hope for survival expose himself as a creature of supernatural evil. Adrian reached for the crucifix with steady fingers. The moment his skin made contact with the blessed silver, the reaction was immediate and catastrophic. The metal began to smoke against his palm, a thin tendril of vapor rising like incense. The acrid smell of burning flesh filled the air, and Elena heard a sound escape Adrian's throat, barely audible, but unmistakably a hiss of agony. Remarkable, Benedetti breathed, his eyes lighting with terrible satisfaction. Dr. Dracul, you seem to have quite an unusual reaction to blessed silver. Perhaps a rare skin condition? Contact dermatitis of some kind? But the damage was done. The scanner in Toretti's hands had erupted into a symphony of electronic shrieking, its blue glow now pulsing like a strobe light. Whatever readings it was detecting had moved far beyond the realm of anything that could be explained by genetic disorders or environmental factors. Elena watched in numb horror as Adrian's carefully maintained human facade began to crack. His skin had gone paper white, making the dark veins beneath more visible. His pupils dilated until his eyes appeared almost black, and when he spoke, she caught the glint of teeth that seemed sharper than they had moments before. "Gentlemen," Adrian said, his voice carrying undertones that made Elena's primitive hindbrain scream warnings about predators in the dark. "I believe we've moved beyond the realm of academic discussion." "Indeed we have." Father Benedetti's hand moved to something concealed within his robes. "Dr. Elena Dracul, I'm afraid your husband has been deceiving you rather dramatically about his true nature." The words hit Elena like physical blows. They didn't suspect her complicity, They thought she was an innocent victim, a human woman married to a monster without her knowledge. Which meant, "I'm placing you both under the authority of the Vatican Supernatural Crimes Division," Benedetti continued, producing what appeared to be an ornate silver collar. "Lord Adrian Dracul, you are accused of violations against the Covenant of Shadows, including unlawful existence beyond natural lifespan and suspected predation upon human victims." Elena's scientific mind catalogued the impossibility of what she was hearing, even as her world collapsed around her. The Vatican had supernatural law enforcement. There were official protocols for dealing with creatures like Adrian, which meant the Catholic Church not only knew vampires existed, but had developed systematic methods for hunting them. "Dr. Dracul," Toretti addressed her directly, his scanner now emitting readings that sounded like a Geiger counter in a radiation field. "You've been exposed to extended contact with a parasitic supernatural entity. Our medical team will need to examine you for signs of blood loss, psychological manipulation, and potential infection." Infection. The word sent ice through Elena's veins. If they believed vampire exposure was somehow contagious, if they subjected her to medical examination by Vatican specialists, they would discover everything: her real identity, her fugitive status, her illegal research, and most catastrophically, her daughter's condition. But worse than her own exposure was the crushing realization that Adrian's capture meant the end of any hope for synthesizing the genetic factors that could save Sophia. The unique properties of his blood, the evolutionary adaptations that allowed him to survive and heal, all of it would disappear into Vatican laboratories where she would never access it again. "Please," Elena heard herself whisper, the word torn from her throat like a physical wound. "You don't understand. I need—" "What you need," Benedetti interrupted gently, "is protection from the creature that has been feeding on you for God knows how long. The metabolic readings suggest extensive blood loss, and vampiric influence can create false emotional attachments in victims. Stockholm Syndrome is quite common in cases of supernatural predation." Elena looked at Adrian, seeing her own despair reflected in his inhuman eyes. He understood as clearly as she did that this was the end, not just of their deception, but of everything they had both been fighting to protect. His freedom, her research, Sophia's life, all of it crumbling under the weight of blessed silver and Vatican jurisdiction. The investigators moved with practiced efficiency, clearly experienced in subduing supernatural threats, and Elena realized that her dark moment wasn't just failure, it was the complete annihilation of hope itself.